Welcome to Lopez Power. I'll be back. I'll be back. Okay, welcome to Lopez Power. Lopez movie review of The Terminator 1984. Now, I love the Terminator movie franchise. I think it's a lot of fun. Um, but I'll go over a list. I might review the other movies too. So the first Terminator, Terminator 1984. I really like this movie. I love this movie. I really do. It's it's a different type of science fiction movie. Um, it's definitely, I'd say this. It's the first well done time travel movie. It really is. Back to the Future is obviously the best time travel movie of all time. But I think the Terminator was the first one, in my opinion. I don't know. I haven't seen the Time Machine from the 1950s, but the Terminator, in my opinion, is the first movie that's done time travel effectively. And it doesn't really go into the science of it, so there's not really many plot holes to it, which is, I think, really cool. So the Terminator was also James Cameron's, not his first movie, but the movie that kicked off his career. He did like Piranha 2 and stuff like that. This kicked off his career, which led him to make, Aliens, The Abyss, True Lies, Terminator 2, Titanic. James Cameron is probably one of the most successful, if not the most successful filmmaker of all time. And I think it's thanks due to the Terminator because it's such an interesting vision of a post-apocalyptic world. Now, post-apocalyptic world, I think the Terminator also did something a little different with post-apocalyptic worlds. Now, first of all, it really does look like a nuclear bomb hit it. It looks like hell. It really does look like hell. Like, other post-apocalyptic movies, like, let's say, Mad Max, or even some zombie movies like Dawn of the Dead, or even movies like Planet of the Apes. It does show a world after, like, war, but it doesn't really feel like a war zone has been there. It's mostly, the cliche is you always see deserts and people trying to survive in, like, a deserted wasteland. Now with the Terminator, it's an interesting style because it shows like buildings, but it's all fallen down buildings, which is a very, I think, accurate portrayal of what a post-apocalyptic world would be. Like, there's bones everywhere, and there's buildings all over each other. It doesn't look like a desert wasteland, which is an interesting take on the future. Because if you look at pictures of, like, 9/11, Ground Zero, it looks a lot like the Terminator, like, post-apocalyptic world. So, it has a sense of realism in that respect. So the movie's about, there's a war between the humans and the machines. It happens after a nuclear war that the machines launched from Skynet. It became self-aware. It was like a military software type of thing. And it was really smart and it became self-aware. And it produced these things called Terminators that exterminate humans. They kind of like endoskeletons. And they go around, exterminating. It's a war between humans and machines. Humans are almost on the brink of extinction. John Connor leads the humans and helps them revolt against the machines. And the machines have a time machine that after the humans beat them, we send a Terminator, which is Schwarzenegger, back in time that looks like a human being to the present, then present time. It's not present anymore. This movie's 31 years old. But anyway, to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, which is John Connor's mother. But the humans also send their protector through time, Kyle Reese, played by Michael Biehn. Fun thing about Michael Biehn is he's an over-the-top actor, but this movie probably wouldn't be as memorable. In my opinion, I think Kyle Reese, Michael Biehn, is actually more memorable than the Terminator in this movie. Like he's just like this very like paranoid like and from other people he looks like a paranoid psychotic man. He's always like what day is it? What year? He's like really over the top and one of those things like you gotta believe me, man. You gotta believe me type of thing. Like he's very over the top performance in this movie. It's not. I mean, it does have subtle parts, but it's kind of in areas where it's over the top. It's because it's not very subtle performance. I think it makes it a little more memorable, which I think is really. I like Michael Biehn in this movie. He's funny, but you do kind of feel that it's a good performance, even though it's not subtle. You believe it. I guess you should say. I should say you still believe the performance he's giving, even though he's like really like ah. But I mean, you probably wouldn't be that way coming from a post-apocalyptic future. Sarah Connor is interesting. Again, it's very similar to like Die Hard, where it's an every man story. This one's kind of an every woman story. She's kind of the every woman, just the normal waitress who gets sucked into a bigger story, but because she's kind of a normal every woman, it gives her a thing of relatability to it. What's interesting about the Terminator is the type of genre it falls into. Um, I I think it could be considered noir. Like this movie, I think kind of takes after Blade Runner. It really does. In a way, if I explain the story to you and how it's going to be filmed on paper, you would think, oh, it's a ripoff of Blade Runner, hunting down robots that look like humans, a robot that looks like a human in a world that's in a film neo noir. And it takes place part of it takes place in the future. If you think about it, if you say it on paper, it kind of feels like a ripoff of Blade Runner, but it really isn't. It's different than Blade Runner. Blade Runner isn't really a post-apocalyptic world. I wouldn't call it a utopian or dystopian. It's kind of in between. But obviously, Terminator is very dystopian. Even the look of L.A. in this movie, like 80s L.A., looks very dystopian. Like it looks very dirty and gritty, which again I guess could give it another sense of a layer of realism. It feels very dirty and gritty. It's an 80s movie. Let's say that it's an 80s look on America, what do you call it? Of a crumbling America, like America and its rough parts during the 80s. Like it doesn't really show like it does for a little bit. It doesn't really show nice areas. It just kind of shows like suburban homes. It does for a little bit when he's hunting down other Sarah Connors, the Terminator. But other than that, it shows more like Los Angeles, the streets of Los Angeles, like the grit, dirty look of the 80s Los Angeles. And again, kind of gives it its own style. I'm going to say this. I do like Terminator 2 a lot better. Not a lot better, but I do like it better than the first one. And I might review that later. I'm not going to get onto reasons why I like that one better. And I think that's one of my favorite movies. But the one thing I think this one actually does better than the first one is the style it has. It has much more of an interesting style to it. Like the gritty sense of realism of like the Los Angeles and like the dark quarter. It's a darker, it's more shadows and all that. It gives it a more sense of noir, which I think with Terminator 2 they're going for more of like an action movie look. It didn't really have a noir look as the first one did. Which I think is a more interesting style to the film. Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator. This kind of started the Terminator. I mean, yeah, he was in like Conan the Barbarian and Pumping Iron before this, but this is the movie that really started his acting movie star career. Like it's the movie that got him started with movies. I mean, I know he was famous for bodybuilding and and bodybuilding, like the best bodybuilder of all time. But he becomes the Terminator is what really kickstarted his movie career, I think. And like after this, he was in like Predator and like True Lies and The Last Action Hero and Commando. Like he was in this movie is really what started his career. Terminator 2. Anyway, and I his performance is memorable. Although I do think Michael Biehn is more memorable in this movie because I think he's see Arnold Schwarzenegger is very under the top, under acted, and what's his name? Michael Biehn is very overacted. Although you believe it still, and this one you believe too. You believe that he's a machine. You believe that he's not going to stop at nothing. And he's Arnold Schwarzenegger is huge in this movie, like even bigger than like him. Maybe the biggest he's ever been in a movie, I think, is when he played this movie. Like even in Predator, I would say he's probably the second biggest. But like with the second Terminator, he actually didn't seem like. I mean, he was buff. Don't get me wrong, he's still buff, but he didn't seem like huge. Like he didn't seem like steroids big in the second movie or the third or the fifth. But in this one, I know a fifth, he's pretty much he's an elderly man in the fifth movie. But anyway, in this movie, he's like huge. He must have did some steroids. But I guess it gave him the look of a machine, a powerful, strong machine that can break through brick walls, and it works. It works for what it is. I think this movie wouldn't have been memorable if they got something like they originally intended. Like they originally intended. It to be played by like what's that guy's name? Like they originally intended it to be played by like Bruce Willis or Richard Gere, like more normally built people, because it was supposed to blend in with the crowd. But that idea was saved for Terminator 2, where the bad Terminator just blends in to like a crowd. He just acts normally, looks like a normal person. Um, Actually, originally Schwarzenegger was supposed to play Kyle Reese, but he wanted the Terminator because he thought the Terminator was so much more interesting than Kyle Reese. And I think it works better that way, him as the Terminator than him as Kyle Reese. I think it would have been more odd if he was Kyle Reese, because how do you get so big in a post-apocalyptic future where how can you get protein? Good enough protein to build big muscle in a post-apocalyptic world. So I think it works much better him as the Terminator. Um, Not to say that Michael Biehn is like Holocaust skinny, but he's more normal size, that like more my build than like, let's say, or he looks like you believe him that he comes from the post-apocalyptic world. Um, the soundtrack is I like the soundtrack. It's that 80s techno feel. Although every time I think of the Terminator theme, except for recently because I did watch the first one, uh, I always saw the one from Terminator 2 Judgment Day more of a symphony feel to it. But this one, I'm not used to this one because I'm more used to the symphony feel of the second one. Whereas this one's very like like very that 80s electric piano techno feel. Um, it's if you love 80s movies, you'll love this movie, and I'm a big fan of 80s movies. Um, just on a side note, of course I was born in the late 90s. The 80s was kind of before my time, but my parents would always get videos from the flea market, like VHS tapes from the flea market, and most of them were 80s movies. And that's actually where I first saw, well, maybe I think I first saw it on TV, but I bought the original VHS from a flea market. So I got like, True Lies and like other 80s movies and like Total Recall and RoboCop, all from the flea market. So because of that, the 80s Batman movie and Batman Returns, all that all because of my parents got videos for me and the family to watch from like the flea markets. I grew up watching a lot of 80s movies and 90s movies also. So I'm nostalgic towards 80s movies even though I wasn't even a heartbeat in the 80s. But if you love 80s movies, you'll love this movie. If you love noir movies, if you love science fiction, again, and time travel, if again it's similar to Back to the Future where it kind of succeeds on many levels, you'll definitely like it. I give the first Terminator an 9 out of 10, an A, 3.5 out of 4 stars. I'll give it 4 out of 4 stars. It really defined how you do post-apocalyptic movies, how you do noir movies, and how you do robot movies. But I think, again, the Terminator does kind of tie into Halloween, because the thing about the first Terminator, I always thought felt more like a horror film. Like, only this time the mask is a real human face rather than like a hockey mask or a William Shatner mask like Halloween. Um, what's his? It's kind of it is kind of a horror film like The Dark Shadows, and the way the Terminator kind of has a body count in the beginning. So it really is kind of it's kind of a science fiction slasher similar to Aliens or an Alien. But it's also a noir movie. It's a horror movie, a noir movie, science fiction, and it works on many levels. I think it's more noir, science fiction noir, but it's really good. Um, Even though I like the second one better, I still have a special place in my heart for the first one because it's covered in that 80s noir style that I love. Um, so if you like 80s movies and science fiction horror noir movies, you'll like The Terminator. I recommend it. The second one is a little different tone than the first movie. It's filmed more like an action movie, action thriller. But this one is really good. Uh, so again, 9 out of 10, 4 out of 4, an A. Terminator 1984, the Terminator. I definitely recommend it. See you next review. God bless.